Good day, everyone. Brewers, researchers, members of the very large brewing community. Welcome to this Fermentis Talkshow today. I'm Stephane Meulemans, the General Manager of Fermentis. And first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizing committee of this first VLB International Brewing Web Conference, the VLB, for giving us the opportunity to come and express ourselves about our technologies made available to the brewing industry. I'm accompanied today by two of my fellow colleagues. First and foremost, I would like to introduce to you Evelyne Fonchy. Evelyne Fonchy is in charge at Fermentis of all the development program oriented towards fermentation solutions for specialty beverages. Also incorporating bacteria fermentation, mixed fermentations. Evelyne comes to us with a very large background in microbiology, PhD in microbiology, and has been very extensively involved at Lesaffre, our parent company. She's been very much involved in developing complex fermentation solutions for specialty beverages. Today she will talk to you about sour beer production and the solutions that we have developed for that purpose. Evelyne, welcome, and I'll leave you the word. Please go ahead.
So, good afternoon, everybody. So, first I would like to thank VLB to give the opportunity to Fermentis to do this presentation at the first VLB International Brewing Web Conference. So, today the presentation will talk about the combination of lactic acid bacteria and active dry yeast for the production of sour beer. So the presentation will be divided in 5 parts. In the first one I will give an overview of the souring process, traditional ones and kettle souring one. Then I will talk briefly about the lactic acid bacteria metabolism. Then I will talk about the key parameters to drive the lactic fermentation. It's very important because the brewer needs some information to drive this fermentation and to act on it to be more performant and to have the good aroma in the final beer. Then we'll talk about the beer and how the production of organic acid will impact the production of alcohol by the yeast, and also how the organic acid are going to influence the aromatic expression in the beer. And then I will sum up the key point of this presentation. So the production of sour beer, the process is quite the same step as for the production of a beer, with the milling, mashing, filtration, boiling, cooling, fermentation, maturation and bottling. So one of the process to produce sour beer is to inoculate at the same time yeast and the lactobacillus during the fermentation. And the beer produced by this process as a Berliner Weiss beer, the bitterness of this beer are very low, under 6 IBU.
But you actually have a lot of beers that are produced by that process. Berliner Weiss beer, I suppose, is an example of
Exactly.
Them. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Another process to obtain sour beer is a process developed in the area of Brussels, in Lambeck. During the cooling of the wort, you have a big aeration of the wort, and in the air you have several microorganisms that are introduced in the wort at this moment. And after the wort is transferred in oak barrels, and the fermentation and maturation will occur in the barrels, and the maturation is very long, several months. And the example of product produced by this process are lambic or Gers beer. Another way to produce sour beer, it's after the main fermentation, you can have another fermentation that occurs in oak fodder. And when you put the wort in the oak fodder, the microorganism present at the surface of the fodder, the bacteria, yeast, are going to inoculate the wort, and after you have a maturation of the fermentation and maturation of the wort. For example, you have the Flanders Red Ale beers. But another interesting process to produce sour beer, it's the kettle souring. So the kettle souring, it's a little bit different because it's before the boiling, the main boiling of the wort. So you have a first boiling of the wort not hopped, and then you introduce the lactic bacteria for the lactic fermentation. After the lactic fermentation, you have a boiling of the wort, and then you introduce the yeast to do the alcoholic fermentation.
Just a question, why do you boil just after filtration, as there is an additional boiling after that?
I guess it is to sterilize the wort prior to inoculation with the bacteria, to have only the bacteria
Yes, sure.
acting in that souring process.
That's
Yes, to be sure.
I think so.
It is.
Well, probably, sure.
And another question quickly in this respect. So why would you use non-hopped wort?
Because we know that the hop, in the hop you have compounds which are bacteriostatic and can inhibit the growth of the bacteria. So when you work on a non-hopped wort, you are sure that the growth of the bacteria can occur. Okay. But another advantage of the kettle souring, it's the alcoholic fermentation is after the lactic fermentation, so the bacteria are not inhibited by the alcohol too.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So now some words about the lactic acid bacteria metabolism. So you have the Homo-fermentative bacteria. The Homo-fermentative bacteria can metabolize glucose into lactate. It's like the SafSour LP652, which is a Lactibacillus plantarum. But you have also the Hetero-fermentative bacteria, and these bacteria are able to metabolize glucose without oxygen in lactate and ethanol. But with oxygen, the glucose is metabolized in lactate and acetate. So, for example, we have the SafSour LB1, which is a Lactobacillus brevis. So now, how to manage the lactic fermentation, which are the key parameters? It's very important because this information are very important for the brewers to manage the fermentation. So the main parameters we studied are pitching rate, wort density, temperature, and the aeration of the wort. To evaluate the performance of the lactic fermentation, several analyses have been performed. First, the acidification kinetics have been followed, and the production of organic acid was also measured. So first, the pitching rate. So as you can see on this graph, on the left you have the graph with LP652, and on the right the graph with LB1. So different pitching rate have been evaluated from 1 gram per hectoliter to 100 gram per hectoliter of bacteria. And as you can see, higher the pitching rate is, lower the pH, the final pH is. But at the same pitching rate, we can see that the pH reached with LP652 is lower. And now, if we correlate these results to the production of organic acid, we can see that the lower the pitching rate is and the lower the lactic acid production is. So if you want to increase the production, you have to increase the pitching rate.
But it doesn't seem to have a lot of effect on acetic acid production.
Yes, but the condition we chose for this experiments was in anaerobic conditions. That's the reason why the acetic is very low in these conditions. Yeah. So, in conclusion, LP652 produce more lactic acid than LB1, as you can see on this graph, and moreover, LB1 produce also acetic acid. Another parameter that have been studied during this work, it's Wort density, the impact of the Wort density. So on this graph, we can see that the final pH is quite the same depending on the Wort density of the Wort, from 8 to 16 degree plateau. And if we correlate, so the difference between the two bacteria is quite slight. In fact, it's very a small difference between the two bacteria. And if we look at the production of organic acid, we can see something a little bit different, because at 8 degree plateau, we have less production of lactic acid, for example, than at 16 degree plateau. But it's quite strange, you can say, because the pH was the same, but the production of acetic or lactic acid is not the same. The reason of this, the explanation for this results is probably that the Wort at 16 plateau have got a higher buffer effect. That's the reason why the pH is the same at 8 and 16 degree plateau.
But that doesn't say anything about the taste, I suppose, or the taste and the flavor. If you increase the quantity of lactic acid, you will probably have a different taste still.
Exactly. In fact, the pH is a good parameter indicator, but effectively, the production of organic acid in these conditions is not the same. Yeah. In fact, it's important for the brewer to have this information to understand. So another parameter is the temperature of the Wort, because after the boiling of the Wort, it's important for the brewer to know when it can inoculate the Wort. And as you can see on this graph, at 45 degrees, we can see no growth of the bacteria. And it's important to cool enough the Wort, and the better temperature to inoculate, it's between 30 and 37 degrees. It's a better optimal temperature for the Wort.
But you could go up to 40 degrees. It depends on the performance that you want to reach, basically.
Yes, but you have a risk because you have less bacteria in the Wort. Yeah. And this result is correlated to the production of organic acid. As you can see on the graph, the quantity of lactic acid is higher at 30 degrees or 37 degrees than at 40 degrees, for example. And now the aeration of the Wort is also very important. So for the bacteria LP652, we can see that without or with oxygen, the beginning of the curve is the same, but at the end we have a final pH lower without oxygen. Though in anaerobic conditions, the lactic fermentation is more performant. But for the LB1, we have quite different profile. We have the same pH at the end of the fermentation with or without oxygen, but at the beginning we can see the LB1 is affected by the presence of oxygen, because we can see the curve is delayed for around 4 hours. And on this histogram we can see that for the LP652 we have the same production of lactic acid and acetic acid. With or without oxygen we have the same behavior of the bacteria, but for LB1 we have something very different, because with oxygen we increase a lot the production of acetic acid, and the ratio between lactic acid and acetic acid is around 3.8 without oxygen, and this ratio is 1.6 with oxygen. So it's we can have a different balance depending if we aerate or not the wort. And this point is very important for the brewer, because if we want to influence the aroma in the beer, it can drive the fermentation and modulate the aeration to produce more or less acetic acid in the wort.
I think that's very important. What you mentioned is to allow the brewers to have a clear understanding of not only the microorganism, but all the parameters that can influence the final expression, which is what you do very well, I think. Yeah.
So this is, you can see on this wort, on this graph, you have an increase of the acetic acid when the aeration is higher in the wort.
Do you know if there is a clear correlation to the amount of aeration you do and the concentration or the expression of acetic acid? Theoretically, chemically, you could be able to explain that, or biochemically you can explain it.
Yes, chemically we can, with the stoichiometric equation, we can.
But today we have not established, I think, that clear correlation.
No,
okay.
Not clear. So, in conclusion of this part, we can say that these bacteria have some common feature, like kinetic of acidification, that are quite close for the both bacteria. We have no significant impact of the wort density on the pH, but we have to be careful that it's not because the pH is the same that the production of acid is the same, as I told you previously, because the density of the wort have a buffer effect. So the brewer should take this information carefully. It's important for driving the fermentation. And the optimal temperature for the both bacteria is around 30-37 degrees. But these bacteria have also some difference. LP652 produce more lactic acid than the bacteria LB1. LB1 produce acetic acid, and if we want to modulate this production, we can play on the aeration of the wort.
So, I mean, that's a great conclusion, very interesting, but do you have any more data on the flavor, the taste, the aromatics?
Yes, now you are going to see how the production of organic acid can impact the alcoholic fermentation and also the aromatic expression in the beer.
Great.
So to evaluate the impact of the organic acid, the SAF lager and the SAF ale have been introduced in the Kettle sour process to see how the yeasts are going to react to the presence of organic acid. So a Kettle sour beer production protocol has been defined based on Pilsen malt, and the lactic fermentation was performed with the optimal parameter, pitching rate of the bacteria at 10 grams of bacteria per hectoliter. The density of the wort was 12 degree plateau. The temperature of the wort was 30 degrees, and the lactic fermentation was realized without aeration. The pH final targeted was 3.5. At the end of the lactic fermentation, the wort was boiled, and the hopped, and the and the IBU targeted was 20. After the wort was inoculated by yeast, and the alcoholic fermentation was realized at 23 degrees, and the pitching rate for the yeast was 50 grams per hectoliter. And then, to evaluate the performance of the yeast, first kinetics of production of alcohols were determined, and also sensory analysis have been done on this beer.
That will be interesting. Nothing better than to talk about taste and flavor, huh, Philippe?
Completely agree with you.
That's what you look for.
So all the SafSour yeast have been evaluated in this process, and so we have two categories of yeast: POF positive and POF negative. So POF negative, that is to say yeast that don't produce phenolic compound, and POF positive, it's yeast which are able to produce phenolic compound. So if we are going to take some example, because I will present the more relevant results, because we don't have time to present all the results. So for example, for the K97 strain, we can see that the presence of acid organic doesn't affect the production of ethanol with this yeast. Even if the lactic fermentation has been performed with LP652 or LB1. It's not the same with US05, because we can see that the curve of production of ethanol are slowed down by the presence of organic acid. But what is important, it's the final quantity of ethanol produced is the same. It's slower, but we have got at the end of the fermentation alcoholic the same quantity of ethanol produced. Now, if we have a look of the lager yeast performance, here the example with the S23, we can see that the production of acid by LP652 affects the production of ethanol of this yeast. But it's not the case with LB1. So it's the same as previously. The curve slowed down, but the final quantity of ethanol is the same, whatever the bacteria used. And here you can see an histogram where you have all the yeast, and we can see that at the end of the fermentation, in presence or in absence of acid organics, the performance and the production of ethanol is the same. So it's quite interesting to see that the kinetics are a little affected, but at the end we have the same quantity of alcohol produced. Now we are going to talk about aroma. So this is the first, the combination between the yeast POF negative and LP652 and LB1. As you can see, the main difference between the aroma profile is higher perception of acidity with the LP652, and moreover, it was noticed more citrus notes with LP652.
So it's a more linear profile. It's more refined, really more on the sour part and on the sharp fruity part,
Yes.
citrusy part. Yeah.
Now we can see the combination of LB1 with POF positive yeast. So POF positive, that is to say yeast that are going to produce notes like clove or spicy note. And with LB1 we can see we have this phenolic odor, flavor which are here. And surprisingly, when the LP652 is used for the lactic fermentation, we lost the phenolic character. So, but we can find the same profile as a POF negative, in fact, with higher acidity, higher fruity notes, but we lost the phenolic character.
So, Eveline, that's a very interesting result and it's quite impressive, but do you have an explanation? Do you have a hypothesis that explains this? Why do you observe that? Why do you feel that? Why do you taste that actually?
So we were surprised by this result, so we have performed more investigation and more analysis of the beer. And for example, we quantify the vinyl guaiacol in the beer, and as you can see on this graph, we confirm that when we use LP652 with POF positive yeast, the quantity of 4-vinyl guaiacol is very low compared to the beer with LB1. So our hypothesis was that the vinyl guaiacol was transformed in an other compound, perhaps the ethyl guaiacol. So we quantify this compound, but no ethyl guaiacol was found in the beer. So our hypothesis now is that the ferulic acid present in the wort is probably transformed in another molecule, another compound, but we need more investigation to understand which is the pathway we implicated in this process.
What is interesting as well here is that the POF positive yeast strains affect negatively the production of 4VG below the threshold. Yeah. Because it's slightly above the POF negative yeast strains, but the threshold is much more intense.
Yeah. So to summarize this part, LP652 seems to consume ferric acid during lactic fermentation. POF positive character is not detected when lactic fermentation is performed with this bacteria. So in conclusion, it's very interesting. We have two very interesting candidates for the kettle souring. First, during the lactic fermentation, we can modulate the production of organic acid with the LB1, depending of the aeration, for example, of the wort. We can produce more or less acetic acid plus lactic acid, and the LP652 produce twice more lactic acid than LB1. Concerning the flavor impact of the lactic acid fermentation, we see that the LB1 is more neutral. It's more a bacteria which don't bring a lot of aroma and respects the yeast flavor aromatic profile. Comparatively, LP652 is going to develop more citrus note and moreover impact the phenolic compound aroma bring by the yeast, and decrease this aroma contrary, it emphasizes the fruity notes of the yeast in the beer. So it's very interesting to modulate the profile of the aroma depending the bacteria you are going to use in the kettle souring. So thank you for your attention, and it was a pleasure to share this moment with you, and take care of you.
Thank you, Evelyn. It's very kind, very nice of you. It's a very nice presentation, by the way. Thank you very much for sharing these results. I just have a last question very quickly. If you consider the acidification kinetics, for one, and then if you see the modularity that you can consider for the flavor expression of these bacteria based on aeration and different other parameters, would there be any sense to combine them either together or sequentially when you do the kettle souring? Would it be interesting to consider LP652 and LB1 together or sequentially? Do you have data on that? Maybe not. It's not a problem, but I think it could be interesting to explore probably, because yes, there is probably some synergies and addition.
Yes,
complementarity.
Exactly. We can see that the properties of the bacteria is different, so probably the combination of the both can be interesting in the beer. Yes. Thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah. Another key point, I think, from your very nice presentation, Evelyn, is that the pH of the wort after, resulting from the kettle souring, does not affect, let's say, the utilization of our yeast strains. So all our yeast strains resist to that
yes,
pH.
Exactly.
And which is really very interesting.
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
Very good.
And now I'm also accompanied by Philip Janssens. Philip Janssens is our person in charge of research and development program for all the beer segment, all the solutions dedicated to beer production. Philippe comes to us with a very long-term experience in the brewing industry. He has worked for large international beer corporations in research and development, pilot production. He's also been involved quite extensively in intellectual property. He has worked then in the hop industry, another key ingredient to make beer, for many years, and now he has joined us at Fermentis to head up this research program dedicated to beers. Today, Philippe will talk to us about a solution for low alcohol and no alcohol beers, which is, as you know, a very trendy subject, as many companies today orient their development efforts towards low and no alcohol beer production, and not necessarily appealing or implementing quite capital-intensive solutions like vacuum distillations or others. So Philippe, thank you for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephane, for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure today to talk about non-alcoholic beverage and low-alcoholic beverage produced through fermentation. I want really to thank you for being with us and this very important moment that we want to share with you. So let's see a little bit as an introduction how evolved the market of this non-alcoholic beer. I will not go really in detail, but we see immediately that the growing will go very fast. So it exists for sure different methods to produce non-alcoholic beverage. One of the methods is using a capex. It will not be my talk today for this part of the presentation. We can use as well a stopped fermentation process, which is not my talk of today. I want to focus today on a high temperature mashing with a regular yeast strain for the production of low alcohol beer. And as a definition, the low alcohol beer will be below 2.5 EBV. This is very important to have it in mind. The second subject matter of today is the use of specific microorganisms for the production of non-alcohol beer. And it is below 0.5 EBV. And so in this presentation, I will show and detail a little bit the non-Saccharomyces organism compared to Saccharomyces organism. So I start with the low alcohol beer with the lager and the ale yeast strain from the Fermentis collection. So we had a set of experimental, and I will show you here some details of these experimental conditions that were produced in a 50-liter trial of pilot plant. So we use a composition of 100% Pils malt, and the brewing was at unique temperature, 75 degrees C, during 20 minutes, and the bitterness that we want to follow was 20 BU. It's important to notice that this equipment we use a Meurer filter 2001 for the Wort filtration. The gravity was 10 Plato, and we use different yeast strains from our collection, so the SAF lager S23, S189, as you know, W3470, pitched at 100 grams per hectoliter and fermented at 14 degrees C. For the ale yeast, we have the SAF ale, as you know, T58, S33, and so on, but we ferment at different conditions at 20 degrees C, and the pitching rate was adapted to 50 grams per hectoliter. The maturation was quite classic at 7 days at 4 degrees C, before we had a dilution to get the alcohol that we want to reach, and the filtration of the beer. So the target was 2.5 ABV, and we anticipate to have an original gravity of the world between 8 and 10 Plato. So let's see a little bit what we did. Here we see that the mashing was at unique temperature, as mentioned. We started at 75 degrees C, but the total time that was anticipated at 20 minutes was a little bit above, and in reality was close to 32 minutes. I will see the impact of this time at 75 degrees C. We see immediately here in this kinetic that the limit was a little bit lower than expected, and we get for most of our yeast a limit of about 2 Plato, which corresponds to an apparent degree of fermentation close to 75%, except for 2 yeast strains, the S33 and the S04, where we have an apparent degree of fermentation between 60 and 70%. And we see here in the graph that the limit is between 4 and 3 degree Plato. In terms of sugar analysis, which is quite important, we see that the consumption of the sugar are basically similar for all our yeast strains, except for the S33. And we know in advance that S33 do not consume maltodextrose. It is important because it's a maltodextrose negative yeast strain. In terms of alcohol production, we see here that we are a little bit above what we expected, and we diluted at 8 Plato to get something that is close to 2.5, at least for S33, but for the other yeast strains we are a little bit above this 2.5. We decide in these experiments to dilute all the beer at the same gravity to be a little bit more consistent. It could be as well possible to dilute all the beers to 2.5, but here it was a decision that we take. An important effect of this process as well is the diacetyl production, and it is not a surprise to see here that the SAF ale produce less diacetyl and consume, let's say, more diacetyl than a lager, where we are a little bit above the threshold, certainly at 8 degree Plato. So we will see in terms of tasting what will be the results. And if we look to other aromatic compounds here, there is some significant amount of aromatic fraction, which is quite interesting, but for sure we have a higher degree of fermentation than expected. And the higher level of alcohol was obtained and reached with the SAF ale BE256, and the higher ester production was with the SAF ale T58. Here are the results of the tasting, and we can see not much differences between the yeast, but there is one maybe that presents a typicity in these, and it is about the fruity aroma. And we see that S23 is probably the best lager solution that we can offer. due to this fruitiness. If we look to the ale beer and we compare them, we see as well big differences here, because there is one that we identify immediately with a different profile, which is the SafSour ale T58, which is with a phenolic character and pronounced character. There is one presenting as well a little bit off notes, but it's just one experience, and is the 256, the BE256. But one other interesting yeast strain is the S33, the SAF ale S33, that produce a little bit more fruitiness than the other. So if we have a recommendation, would be in the ale, those two yeast strain. So our recollection due to this process is probably the Meurer filter 2001, which is using a fine coarse milling, seems to increase the enzymatic activities during the brewing step, which means that we have a higher degradation than expected. If we look to the objective of the production of the 2.5 EBV with a gravity between 8 and 10 Plato, we can recommend using a composition of 100% of malt pills with a brewing that we can adapt. And let's say that we have to monitor initially what is the gelatinization point of the malt that are including in the composition, and it's probably close to 75 degrees C. And if we use a 2001 mesh filter and not the 2201, I'm sorry for that, we have to reduce the contact time to about 10 minutes as a maximum to expect having a lower degree of fermentation. And if there is a low tone, the contact time could be between 15 and 20 minutes. For the yeast strain, our recollection would be for the ale to have a SAF ale S33, which is the non-phenolic and probably producing a little bit more fruitiness. And if you look for a phenolic solution, which is nice, we have the SAF ale T58. For the lager production, we recommend the SAF lager S23 with slightly more fruitiness as well in these compositions.
So, Philippe, so you reckon that high temperature mashing is a feasible or interesting solution for brewers of a certain size primarily, probably. It's an interesting solution to produce low alcohol beers, but there are some points of attention.
Absolutely, this is completely clear. And for sure, it needs to be adapted according to the raw materials that are using, and certainly the process. And the process, I really need to focus on it. It's your process, you know your process. It's for sure, depending on the milling conditions, where you put the malt and the water, what temperature, what time contact, and what equipment of the filtration, and how it occurs. So it's really critical. And it's really a little bit your responsibility, brewer, and I really talk to you to adapt it. And you may make some trials initially and adapt it, because it's completely difficult to get it at the first time. So it's my recommendation.
And milling, mashing, filtration is really key. It's quite essential.
Absolutely. Temperature and time to be controlled. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the second part of this talk will be dedicated to the non-alcoholic beer with specific and non-specific microorganisms. So here, I will talk about some maltose negative microorganism, because if we want to have some low alcoholic beer beverage and non-alcoholic beer beverage, we need to use a maltose negative yeast strains.
So I just want to stop you here for a second, Philippe. So
yes,
the previous part was clearly targeting less than 2.5% alcohol. Here you're getting in what? What's the target? It doesn't work. It's below 0.5. So it's the target is below 0.5. I'm sorry, and thank you for this comment. It's very critical that we are precise and everyone understand that we are below 0.5 EBV. So the high temperature mashing aims at less than 2.5, can be lower, but not in all conditions. And then here in this case with some other microorganisms, you can reach less than
This is
0.5.
correct. So there will be, here you will see a normal, let's say, process, but the specificity is the microorganism. On the first part, as you mentioned, there was a process that was specific with a regular yeast strain. So here, the objective is to use maltose negative yeast strains. And so we use several microorganisms. It was the Saccharomyces chevalieri, that was from the Lesaffre collection. And we look to external collection, the NCORC, where we identify a Pichia cloveri, a Saccharomyces ludwigi, a Toilaspora delbrueckii, and a Zygosaccharomyces ruxi. So it was, the experimental protocol was a classical word, as mentioned before, the no specificity, so a malt composition 100%. The diagram was classic with 65 degrees C for 50 minutes, 73 for 10 minutes, and we produce at a 12 Plato with a mosaic hops for a target of 25 BU. Temperature of fermentation was here 2 conditions for the Saccharomyces chevalieri, only 1 condition, 22 degrees C, for all the microorganism. And we dilute, the target was a dilution at 8 Plato to get something close to 16 BU, corresponding to about 0.5 EBV. We'll see the results here. But a big difference between, let's say, a regular Saccharomyces cerevisiae and other is in the way they assimilate the sugar. So here I briefly put a standard composition and a typical word coming from the brewing industry, and we see in terms of weight percentage that the glucose corresponds to about 10-15%. The maltose is the large part of the sugar, between 50 and 60. The maltotriose could be between 10 and 20%, and the dextrin, which is the higher level of the sugar, between 15 and 20% in weight. So, looking to the assimilation of the sugar, on the left side you have the Wort, which is the standard. On the right side we have the chevalieri, and we see that the chevalieri do not consume the maltose because the level is the same as the Wort. And we see that the other microorganisms that were identified as maltose negative probably assimilate very slowly the maltotriose. And in terms of ethanol production, we see as well that we are completely standard because the chevalieri produce about 1 EBV, and there are some microorganisms consuming a little bit more, with the higher level of alcohol a little bit above 1, but it's not really critical at that step. But what is important to notice that maybe some other microorganisms than the chevalieri may consume fraction of maltose. So, for sure, if those microorganisms consume slightly part of the maltose, it may affect the attenuation with the alcohol production, as we have seen, but as well the carbonation of the beer after. We are certain that with the chevalieri, all the maltose are not consumed and the fermentation stops automatically with no risk of higher attenuation and oversaturation. In terms of tasting, yes?
Can I interrupt you just for a second here, because I think there is something important to mention. In any case, because you could always have in the process somehow, even with the raw materials, you could always have introduction of a maltose positive microorganism in the process. So in any case, I think we recommend to pasteurize the beer, sure, whether you use a chevalieri or another one. Sure. So in both cases, whatever happens, even
yes,
if you have a maltose positive slow, yes, you will actually inhibit or yes, inactivate this yeast in any case.
This is absolutely correct. I will come a little bit later on the pasteurization that is absolutely mandatory in this type of process, okay, to avoid complete oversaturation and explosion of bottles, because if there is a contamination somewhere, for sure, the fermentation will continue in the bottle with all the risks that it affects and contains. Absolutely, this is totally correct, and thank you for mentioning it. It's really important to notice it. So to come back to the tasting results, we have seen that the Torula Spora produce more a neutral, malty, worty beer. The Ludwigi was a little bit more artificial with some notes of DMS and some taster detect some plastic, but as well a balance with the fruitiness was identified. The Ruxi produced a lot of flavor. We don't really recommend. The Piccia was really, really fruity with a lot of production of isoamyl acetate, which is the banana flavor. And the Saccharomyces chevalieri produced a very well balanced beer with a slightly note of phenol character because it's a POF positive yeast strains. So today, from all those microorganisms, we have selected the SafBrew LA01, which is the chevalieri for the rest of our protocol. So here in this experiment, we will use the SafBrew LA01 at 50 gram hectoliters in a Weyermann Wort of 15 Plato, and we will ferment it at 20 degrees C, or realize it in flask. So we see that at different gravity, so we had 6 Plato till 15 Plato, that does not affect really the limit in terms of time. So it means that the limit is reached after 60 hours. And it's really important to know that the process is quite fast and we don't need to wait for weeks, because if we wait for weeks, the risk of over-carbonation, over-saturation, over-fermentation may occur if there is a contamination somewhere. So, in terms of apparent degree of fermentation, we see that everything is ranging between 13 and 14. If we remember the composition, the typical composition of a wort, the glucose were between 10 and 15% in weight, and we are completely within these limits. Even if the scale is starting at 12, the difference is really marginal. The sugar composition as well, because we see here the wort, and if we focus on the simple sugar, which are the fructose and the glucose, we see that are consumed completely, but the DP2, which is the maltose, is not consumed, and the DP3 for sure neither, which is the maltotriose. In terms of ethanol, for sure it follows a little bit the same rules as the gravity, because the more gravity, the more alcohol, which is logical. And we try to correlate the gravity and the ethanol production, and we obtain a very nice linear regression where we can anticipate the level of alcohol or the gravity we need to get the 0.5 EBV. And here, in this example, we can say that 0.5 EBV can be reached with a gravity ranging between 7 and 8 Plato. The volatile compounds are quite significant because we see at least something. We had some acetaldehyde produced, which is not necessarily negative in these type of beers. The isoamyl alcohol is for sure a little bit before the threshold, and as well as the isobutanol and the diacetyl, hopefully. But all those compounds may act with a synergetical effect that produce a certain balance of the product. We see as well at a different temperature, at least for the SafBrew LA01, at 10 degrees C, that we have more, let's say, ethanol production, and we go faster and higher in fermentation with a higher temperature. So the SafBrew LA01 should be fermented at higher temperature than 10 degrees C. As a first conclusion, we can say that the SafBrew LA01 produces a well-balanced beer with slightly phenolic, but preferably fermented above 10 degrees C. It contains some residual sugar, and therefore the beer is fragile, and in that respect, we need to consider an additional process as the pasteurization. And we will see a little bit more in detail what we perform here. So we had a wort fermented with the SafBrew LA01 at 25 degrees C. We centrifuge, and we intentionally cross-contaminate with a yeast, a T58, at different level of contamination, 0 CFU per ml till 10 to the 5 CFU per ml. So we have a significant amount of contamination in this beer. We pasteurize at 63 degrees C, and we calculate for sure the pasteurization time according to the formula that you probably know. We sequence with no latency, so immediately after the contamination we pasteurize at different level, 25, 50, 75, 100 PU, and then we plate with a media to allow all the microorganisms to grow. We see in this graph that 25 PU, significant amounts of yeast continue to grow and are identified, so it's not enough. Because we can consider generally 25 PU for a pills process as a guarantee and enough, but in this product it's not enough. And at 50 PU, it completely disappeared. There is no presence of the T58 in this case. So as a recommendation, we can say that a minimum of 50 PU is recommended and mandatory. If we go now to the main conclusion of this talk, we can say that the pitching rate is exactly the same as we can have with the SAF ale, so it's 50 grams per hectoliters. The fermentation temperature that we recommend are between 15 and 25 degrees C, with an apparent degree of fermentation of about 15%, with using a traditional brewing diagram. The alcohol of about 0.5 EBV will be reached with an original gravity ranging between 7 and 8 Plato. And the pH will be close to 4.5 with that. So it guarantees as well some protection due to the low pH. There is no off flavor. This is a good point. The pasteurization should be between 50 as a minimum till 100 PU. It is a product that could not be reused for repitching, and certainly not for refermentation. I can't finish this talk before thanking our partner, which are Meurice Institute and KU Leuven, as well as the technical team of Fermentis. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Philippe. It's a very interesting talk, and really a talk that goes very much in line with our strategy to address this growing world of non-alcoholic beverage. One thing I noticed, and it's quite interesting in the results that you presented, probably as a summary, is that the microorganism that we have selected this far, SafBrew LA01, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae chevalieri, this microorganism we've selected actually develops or can develop very easily a non-alcoholic beer with less than 0.5%, assuming you run the process right, you pasteurize, you protect, and everything else. And what's very interesting, I think, and I've had a chance on events to drink beers, 0.5 and less % alcohol beers, like at the Brouw 1 year ago in November, beers that are developed and where the microorganism achieves the target of less than 0.5, but allows raw materials to express themselves. Yeah. With a nice hoppy flavor. You can variate the hoppiness of that beer and still respect that very low alcohol, which makes the beer very drinkable. It was really exceptional. Yes. And I think our intention is also in the future to explore alternative solutions that will by themselves, in fermentation, develop more flavor by themselves. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. So the raw materials are really important, and it's a microorganism that goes perfectly well with hops. Because sometimes hops could be considered as negative with non-alcoholic beverage. And I remember the time we use a stop fermentation and using some hops, the worty character is intensified by the hop ingredient. And here, a big difference between the LAO1 and a stop fermentation with the current yeast, a normal yeast strain which is not maltose negative, is the worty taste. We have absolutely no worty taste with the Lesaffre.
It ferments and does all the biotransformation that you expect, except the alcohol production.
Yes, probably it consumes the aldehydes that are responsible from the worty character. It probably. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great solution. I've had beers myself, and I was always impressed with the drinkability and the expression of the raw materials you have in those beers, still respecting that low alcohol.
Surprisingly, to see, even we don't detect such a level of alcohol so low, because it's really rich in taste indeed.
It's very enjoyable. I mean, I always prefer beer with alcohol. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
It was not my talk today, but I would be happy to make it.
We're always happy to share one together. I know that.
That's true. That's true. Thank you, Stephane.
So thank you again, Philippe. It was a great talk. It's very nice that you did that. So I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you really enjoyed this session or these sessions, the one of earlier today with Evelyn and now with Philippe. I really hope you enjoyed it and you get something out of it that will allow you to orient your choices and develop the beers you want to do, whether it's in the sour world or whether it's in the non-alcoholic world, that you can really find your way in that. And for sure, do not hesitate to reach out to our experts, Philippe and Evelyn, and other people from Fermentis, of course, if you have questions about these technologies and the way to apply them. Thank you again, and see you soon, hopefully live, the next time. Take care. Bye-bye.